Welcome. This is Soothing Whispers ASMR. As always, if there are any sounds or words that you would like to hear me perform, please leave them below in the comments. Tonight, I thought that we could enjoy some more fairy tales by the Brothers Grimm. Specifically, please sit back, relax, and enjoy the tale of little Brier-Rose, or as it is more commonly known today, Sleeping Beauty. A king and queen had no children, although they wanted one very much. Then, one day, while the queen was sitting in her bath, a crab crept out of the water onto the ground and said, "Your wish will soon be fulfilled, and you will bring a daughter into this world." And that is what happened. The king was so happy about the birth of the princess that he held a great celebration. He also invited the fairies who lived in his kingdom, but because he had only 12 golden plates, one had to be left out, for there were 13 of them. The fairies came to the celebration, and as it was ending, they presented the child with gifts. The one promised her virtue, the second one gave beauty, and so on, each one offering something desirable and magnificent. The 11th fairy had just presented her gift when the 13th fairy walked in. She was very angry that she had not been invited and cried out, "Because you did not invite me, I tell you that in her 15th year your daughter will prick herself with a spindle and fall over dead." The parents were horrified, but the 12th fairy, who had not yet offered her wish, said, "It shall not be her death. She will only fall into 100-year sleep." The king, hoping to rescue his child, issued an order that all spindles in the entire kingdom should be destroyed. The princess grew and became a miracle of beauty. One day, when she had just reached her 15th year, the king and queen went away, leaving her all alone in the castle. She walked from room to room, following her heart's desire. Finally, she came to an old tower. A narrow stairway led up to it. Being curious, she climbed up until she came to a small door. There was a small yellow key in the door. She turned it, and the door sprang open. She found herself in a small room where an old woman sat spinning flax. She was attracted to the old woman and joked with her and said that she too would like to try her hand at spinning. She picked up the spindle, but no sooner did she touch it than she pricked herself with it and fell down into a deep sleep. At the same moment the king and his attendants returned, and everyone began to fall asleep. The horses in the stalls, the pigeons on the roof, the dogs in the courtyard, the flies on the walls, even the fire on the hearth flickered, stopped moving, and fell asleep. The roast stopped sizzling, the cook let go of the kitchen boy, whose hair he was about to pull. The maid dropped the chicken that she was plucking. They all slept, and a thorn hedge grew up around the entire castle, growing higher and higher until nothing at all could be seen of it. Princes who had heard about the beautiful Brier-Rose came and tried to free her, but they could not penetrate the thorns. It was as if the thorns were firmly attached to their hands. The princes became stuck in them, and they died miserably. And thus it continued for many long years. Then one day a prince was traveling through the land. An old man told him about the belief that there was a castle behind the thorn hedge with a wonderfully beautiful princess asleep inside with all of her attendants. His grandfather had told him that many princes had tried to penetrate the hedge, but that they had gotten stuck in the thorns and had been pricked to death. "I'm not afraid of that," said the prince. "I shall penetrate the hedge and free the beautiful Brier-Rose." He went forth, but when he came to the thorn hedge, it turned into flowers. They separated, and he walked through, but after he passed, they turned back into thorns. He went into the castle. Horses and colorful hunting dogs were asleep in the courtyard. Pigeons with their little heads stuck under their wings were sitting on the roof as he walked inside. The flies on the walls, the fire in the kitchen, the cook and the maid were all asleep. He walked further. All the attendants were asleep, and still further the king and the queen. It was so quiet that he could hear his own breath. Finally he came to the old tower where Brier-Rose was lying asleep. The prince was so amazed at her beauty that he bent over and kissed her. At that moment she awoke, and with her the king and queen and all the attendants, the horses and the dogs, the pigeons on the roof, and the flies on the walls. The fire stood up and flickered, and then finished cooking the food. The roast sizzled away. The cook boxed the kitchen boy's ears, and the maid finished plucking the chicken. When the prince and Brier-Rose got married, they lived long and happily until she died. I have a few thoughts on that tale. First, clearly the moral is that even if you only have 13 plates, you should always invite all the fairies. That tale is very familiar to the Disney version that I, and probably many of you, grew up on. It, however, is a very sanitized tale, at least compared to another version. As is common with many tales, particularly the old ones, throughout the years there have been many different versions of the same fairy tale, or at least fairy tales with similar themes. So we're also going to read a second version, which is much, much darker and more twisted. This version is called Sun, Moon, and Talia by Giamgattista Basile. There once lived a great lord who was blessed with the birth of a daughter whom he named Talia. He sent for the wise men and astrologers in his lands to predict her future. They met, counseled together, and cast her horoscope, and at length they came to the conclusion that she would incur great danger from a splinter of flax. Her father therefore forbade that any flax, hemp, or any material of that sort be brought into his house, so that she should escape the predestined danger. One day, when Talia had grown into a young and beautiful lady, she was looking out of a window when she beheld passing that way an old woman who was spinning. Talia, never having seen a distaff or a spindle, was pleased to see the twirling spindle, and she was so curious as to what that thing it was that she asked the old woman to come to her. Taking the distaff from her hand, Talia began to stretch the flax. Unfortunately, Talia ran a splinter of flax under her nail, and she fell dead upon the ground. When the old woman saw this, she became frightened and ran down the stairs, and is running still. As soon as the wretched father heard of the disaster which had taken place, he had them, after having paid for this tub of sour wine with casks of tears, lay her out in one of his country mansions. There they seated her upon a velvet throne under a canopy of brocade. Wanting to forget all and to drive from his memory his great misfortune, he closed the doors and abandoned forever the house where he had suffered this great loss. After a time, it happened by chance that a king was out hunting and passed that way. One of his falcons escaped from his hand and flew into the house by way of one of the windows. The falcon did not come when called, so the king had one of his party knock at the door, believing the palace to be inhabited. Although he had knocked for a length of time, nobody answered, so the king had them bring a vinter's ladder, for he himself would climb up and search the house to discover what was inside. Thus he climbed and entered, and looking in all the rooms and nooks and corners, and was amazed to find no living person there. At last he came to the salon, and when the king beheld Talia, who seemed to be enchanted, he believed that she was asleep, and he called her, but she remained unconscious. Crying aloud, he beheld her charms, and felt his blood course hotly through his veins. He lifted her in his arms and carried her to a bed where he gathered the first fruits of love. Leaving her on the bed, he returned to his own kingdom, where, the pressing business of his realm, he for a time thought no more about the incident. Now, after 9 months, Talia delivered 2 beautiful children, one a boy, the other a girl. In them could be seen 2 rare jewels, and they were attended by 2 fairies who came to that palace and put them at their mother's breasts. Once, however, they sought the nipple, and not finding it, began to suck on Talia's fingers, and they sucked so much that the splinter of flax came out. Talia awoke as if from a long sleep, and seeing beside her 2 priceless gems, she held them to her breast and gave them the nipple to suck, and the babies were dearer to her than her own life. Finding herself alone in that palace with 2 children by her side, she did not know what had happened to her, but she did notice that the table was set, and food and drink were brought in to her, although she did not see any attendants. In the meanwhile, the king remembered Talia, and saying that he wanted to go hunting, he returned to the palace and found her awake and with 2 cupids of beauty. He was overjoyed, and he told Talia who he was, and how he had seen her, and what had taken place. When she heard this, their friendship was knitted with tighter bonds, and he remained with her for a few days. After that time, he bade her farewell, and promised to return soon, and take her with him to his kingdom. And he went to his realm, but he could not find any rest, and at all hours he had in his mouth the names of Talia and of sun and moon, for those were the children's names, and when he took his rest, he called either one or other of them. Now the king's wife began to suspect that something was wrong from the delay of her husband while hunting, and hearing him name continually Talia, sun and moon, she became hot with another kind of heat than the sun's. Sending for the secretary, she said to him, "Listen to me, my son, you are living between 2 rocks, between the post and the door, between the poker and the grate. If you will tell me with whom the king, your master, and my husband is in love, I will give you treasures untold. And if you hide the truth from me, you will never be found again, dead or alive." The man was terribly frightened. Greed and fear blinded his eyes to all honor, to all sense of justice, and he related to her all things, calling bread, bread, and wine, wine. The queen, hearing how matters stood, sent the secretary to Talia in the name of the king, asking her to send the children, for he wished to see them. Talia, with great joy, did as she was commanded. Then the queen, with the heart of Medea, told the cook to kill them, to make them into several tasteful dishes for her wretched husband. But the cook was tender-hearted and seeing these two beautiful golden apples, felt pity and compassion for them. He carried them home to his wife and had her hide them. In their place, he prepared 2 lambs into 100 different dishes. When the king came, the queen, with great pleasure, had the food served. The king ate with delight, saying, "By the life of Lanfusa, how tasteful this is," or, "By the soul of my ancestors, this is good." Each time she replied, "Eat, eat, for you are eating your own." For 2 or 3 times the king paid no attention to this repetition, but at last, seeing that the music continued, he answered, "I know perfectly well that I am eating of my own, because you have brought nothing into this house." And growing angry, he got up and went to a villa at some distance from his palace, to solace his soul and alleviate his anger. In the meanwhile, the queen, not being satisfied with the evil already done, sent for the secretary and told him to go to the palace and to bring Talia back, saying that the king longed for her presence and was expecting her. Talia departed as soon as she heard these words, believing that she was following the commands of her lord, for she greatly longed to see her light and joy, knowing not what was preparing for her. She was met by the queen, whose face glowed from the fierce fire burning inside her, and looked like the face of Nero. She addressed Talia thus: "Welcome, Madam Busybody. You are a fine piece of goods, you ill weed, who are enjoying my husband. So you are the lump of filth, the cruel bitch that has caused my head to spin. Change your ways, for you are welcome in purgatory, where I will compensate you for all the damage you have done to me." Talia, hearing these words, began to excuse herself, saying that it was not her fault, because the king, her husband, had taken possession of her territory when she was drowned in sleep. And the queen would not listen to Talia's excuses, and had a large fire lit in the courtyard of the palace, and commanded that Talia should be cast into it. The lady, perceiving that matters had taken a bad turn, knelt before the queen and begged her to allow her to at least take off the garments she wore. The queen, not for pity for the unhappy lady, but to gain also those robes which were embroidered with gold and pearls, told her to undress, saying, "You can take off your clothes. I agree." Talia began to take them off, and with every item that she removed, she uttered a loud scream. Having taken off her robe, her skirt, the bodice, and her shift, she was on the point of removing her last garment, when she uttered a last scream, louder than the rest. They dragged her towards the pile, to reduce her to lye ashes which would be used to wash Sharon's breeches. The king suddenly appeared, and finding this spectacle, demanded to know what was happening. He asked for his children, and his wife, reproaching him for his treachery, told him that she had them slaughtered and served to him as meat. When the wretched king heard this, he gave himself up to despair, saying, "Alas, then I myself am the wolf of my own sweet lambs. Alas, And why did these veins not know the fountains of their own blood? You renegade bitch, what evil is this which you have done? Begone, you shall get your desert as the stumps, and I will not send such a tyrant-faced one to the Colosseum to do her penance. So saying, he commanded that the queen should be cast into the fire, which she had prepared for Talia, the secretary, with her, because he had been the handle for this bitter play, and weaver of this wicked plot. He was going to do the same with the cook, whom he believed to be the slaughterer of his children, when the man cast himself at the king's feet, saying, in truth, my lord, for such a deed there should be nothing else than a pile of living fire, and no other help than a spear from behind, and no other entertainment than twisting and turning within the blazing fire. And I should seek no other honor than to have my ashes, the ashes of a cook, mixed up with the queen's. But this is not the reward that I expect for having saved the children, in spite of the gall of that bitch who wanted to kill them and to return to your body that which was of your own body. Hearing these words, the king was beside himself. He thought he was dreaming. He could not believe what his own ears had heard. Therefore, turning to the cook, he said, if it is true that you have saved my children, be sure that I will take you away from turning the spit, and I will put you in the kitchen of this breast, to turn and twist as you like all my desires. Giving you such a reward shall enable you to call yourself a happy man in this world. While the king spoke these words, the cook's wife, seeing her husband's need, brought forth the two children, sun and moon, before their father. And he never tired at playing the game of three with his wife and children, making a mill wheel of kisses, now with one and then with the other. He gave a generous reward to the cook. He made him a chamberlain. He married Talia, making her his wife, and she enjoyed a long life with her husband and her children, thus experiencing the truth of the proverb, those whom fortune favors find good luck even in their sleep. That was dark. So the king is either a rapist or guilty of necrophilia, depending on whether Talia was actually dead or alive. There seems to be some confusion on that point. A few other notes. Lamb would not have been my meat of choice when pretending that I was cooking with human flesh. Lamb is very gamey, and I think the king or the queen would have known it was lamb. Also, for the cook, when you are being literally dragged to a fire because someone wants to murder you for killing his children, maybe it would be best to begin with, oh, no, I didn't cook them, rather than having that long introduction first. Just food for thought. But, again, it is a fairy tale. It also amazes me what passes back in the day for a children's story. When I upload these YouTube videos, it has two options. Yes, this video is for children, or no, this video is not for children. After that latest story, I think you can see why I always select the option, no, these videos are not intended for children. Because what parent would want to read their child a story about rapists and or necrophiliacs, cannibalism, murder, and cooking children? That just doesn't sound very wholesome and friendly to me. And with that, I fear that we have come to the end of our video. So as always, I wish you a wonderful day and a wonderful night. Sweet dreams.